The story of God's love is truly epic. It reaches across the centuries, and it is recorded on the pages of the Bible. Welcome to Monocle and Spade, the podcast of epic archaeology, where we explore the world of the Bible and beyond through the lens of history and archaeology.
Welcome to the inaugural podcast of Monocle and Spade, the official podcast of epic archaeology, where we'll be exploring the world of the Bible and beyond through the lens of history and archaeology. I want to say a huge thank you to Kurt and Michaela Jaros for believing in me and this vision for epic archaeology. Kurt, as many of you know, is the executive director for Defenders Media, which provides media solutions to apologists and apologetics-based ministries, and also to Chris Yisla, who is our technical director. So I'm so excited today that we have our first guest who is joining us all the way from Jerusalem, the city of gold. And I've known Scott for several years. Scott Stripling is the current Director of Excavations at Tel Shiloh in Israel. Previously, Scott directed excavations at Khirbet el-Maqatir from 2013 to 2016. He also served as Field Supervisor to the el-Hammam Excavation Project in Israel from 2005 to 2010, and also served as a supervisor of the Jerusalem Temple Mount Salvage Project in Jerusalem. Dr. Stripling is also the provost for the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. Scott is a native Texan with 36 years experience serving professionally as a pastor, a principal, a professor, and an all-around slave driver to his excavators and dig volunteers. Wait a minute, Henry sent me, so I don't think that was in the thing. Anyway, he said you're a slave driver. Scott, I don't think you're a slave driver, but anyway, thank you so much for joining us from Israel.
Thanks, Ted. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm actually sitting right now, and my hotel sits on top of the third wall built by Agrippa in 44 AD. And sections of this have been found in recent years, one by the Russian compound. But my hotel's literally on top of the third wall, so I'm coming to you from the wall.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, the subject matter today is something that is very important. In fact, two major events in the history and the life of ancient Israel in the Old Testament. I would argue that these events are non-negotiable in foundational importance to the Bible. Now, I want to be careful to say that I don't think that they're salvific, except maybe indirectly. And the events that I'm talking about and the events that Scott and I will be discussing today are the Exodus and Conquest. They are of pivotal importance in the Bible. Now, we've made this point before on many of our blog posts, and those of you who follow us on social media know this, and that is that history and faith are intimately connected together. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the Apostle Paul makes it very clear that if Christ has not been risen from the dead, literally, if he's not literally, the tomb is empty, then Christians, what we believe is completely empty and vain, and our faith is futile, and we have a dead faith. But, and that is the case for sure. But with the Old Testament, we're not necessarily talking about the resurrection per se, but we are talking about many of the events in the Old Testament refer to Christ, or they illuminate Christ and who he was. In fact, Jesus died as the Passover lamb. So he died on Passover. And in fact, what's very interesting also is that when the angel visited Mary, when she was told Mary that she was going to conceive and give birth to a son, the angel told Mary to name him Yeshua, which is the word Joshua, the name Joshua. So all these allusions go back to the Old Testament, which shows us that God really puts a lot of value and a lot of weight on the events of the Old Testament. And I would also argue that the first century believers, the believers that were the Jews who lived in the time of the New Testament, they also believe that these events actually happened. And so today, many people today, many skeptics of the Bible, and atheism seems to be on the rise again, at least people who are atheist or agnostic. Many people think that these stories are just fables or legends without any support from history or archaeology. But hopefully today, we're going to put some of those doubts to rest. Now, Scott and I were talking earlier, and there's another Egyptologist by the name of Dr. James Hoffmeyer who has a different view on the date of the Exodus, but he did say this, and I think this is very important. He said that the Exodus and Conquest stand or fall together, and I think he's right. So whenever we find the Exodus, we're going to find the conquest. So whatever dates we plug into either of those, we're going to talk about that. So among evangelical scholars today, Scott, as you know this, there are two major views of the date of the Exodus. Most evangelicals believe that there was an Exodus, but they disagree about the date. And there's the early date, and then there's the late date. And so, Scott, I want to just pitch it to you, and just right out the outset, what are a couple of reasons why you think, as a student of the Bible, as an archaeologist, and also a Bible scholar, why you believe that the date of the Exodus is the early date? Is there any internal evidence in the Bible that gives us any clues to that?
Sure, Ted. And first of all, let me say thanks for having me on this initial podcast. I'm super excited, and I often, I guess daily, see your posts on Epic, and I always enjoy them. So
thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
When I look in the scriptures, Ted, I see a number of passages that point me to the 15th century BC. And I think that's the plain reading of the text. In fact, even those who take what's often called the late date, they acknowledge that the plain reading of the text points you to the 15th century BC. They just don't see archaeological evidence in the 15th century BC. And so in their view, we got to kind of help out God's reputation a little bit and rescue him from this lack of evidence. Well, what we're going to talk about today is there's a lot of evidence, textually and archaeologically. So to answer your question, I would begin with 1 Kings 6:1, which says essentially in the 480th year after the Israelites exited from Egypt, Solomon began to build his temple. So we start with a known date. Fortunately, we all agree on the date of 966, 967, and that's pretty rare to get us all to agree on something. The maxim is where there are two archaeologists, there are three opinions.
Hey,
so
that's exactly right.
and I sometimes simultaneously hold both of them. But no, and in all seriousness, we all agree on that date of, say, 967. We add to that 479 years because it was in the 480th year. It wasn't a complete cycle.
And let me just interrupt this point, and just to clarify for the listeners, when we're talking about the date of 966, 968, that is the date when Solomon laid the foundation of his temple. Is that correct?
That's right.
So that's where archaeologists are in agreement. They're in agreement on that date. But then when you do the math in 1 Kings 6:1 and you look at back, that will then give us a date. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, thanks. When I'm teaching my students, I always start with first principles. And so first principle for me is we're going to move from the known to the unknown. So 967 is a known date. Now, the Bible gives us some data. It says that 479 years before that is when the Israelites exited from Egypt. Now, Ted, I went to public school, but I could do that math in my head. And that puts me in the mid-15th century BC. So 1446 BC as a starting point.
Yes.
Now, do we have other scriptures that would synchronize that? Yes. Judges 11:26. We have the prophet Jephthah, who's speaking to the Ammonites, or the king of Ammon, and he says to him essentially, it's a border dispute that they're having, and he says, if you had issues with the boundaries, why didn't you raise them before this? My people have been in this land now for 300 years. Now, I don't know that it matters whether it was 299 or 301. I don't know that he was saying exactly 300 years, but the point is for 3 centuries,
yes,
we've been here. So all of us would date Jephthah to around 1100. So 1100 plus 300 is 1400. So
yes.
We know there's a 1446 BC date given to us, then a 40-year wilderness wandering, and then a 6-year conquest. Guess what year that puts you in? 1400.
It's amazing.
So we synchronize really nicely.
Yes.
And I'll give you one more.
Okay.
And then there's several others that we could delve into, but I think these three really lay the predicate. 1 Chronicles 6:33 through 37.
Okay.
So here we have a genealogy that goes back to the time of Moses. So it's from the time of David to the time of Moses. We have the worship leader in David's time, Heman, who's a colleague, if you will, of Asaph. We know Asaph a little better because he wrote a lot of the Psalms. But back 18 generations to the time of Moses, to Korah, who's specifically mentioned there. Now, again, general agreement is, in fact, I think everyone would take this approach, that a generation was 25 years approximately. And so 25 times 18 gets you from David to Solomon, but we're going to add from David to Moses, we're going to add a 19th generation to get us to Solomon,
Gotcha.
to David's son.
Yes.
Okay. So 19 times 25 equals 475. When we add 475 to 966, guess where that puts us?
Wow.
In the mid 15th century BC, almost exactly at the date given to us.
It's remarkable.
When we take 1 Kings 6:1 and Judges 11:26. So the biblical case is airtight.
Yes.
Now, of course, you know what our late date friends would do with the 480 years.
Yes. Yes.
It's kind of elastic. They're going to say that those are 12 idealized generations,
right,
because 480 is too perfect of a number, but the number's not actually 480. It's in 479. It's
right,
in the 480th year. But then they transpose the math. So it's 12 generations of 40 years, but a generation is really 25 years. So 12 times 25, the biblical writers should have said 300 is essentially what they're saying.
They know better.
That's how they do the math. So go figure.
Yeah, that's the new math.
Yeah. And let me just say, and I know you and I agree, that some of these guys may be better Christians than I am. This has nothing to do with whose heart is right with God. Okay, we're talking about the accuracy of the text.
Amen. That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Scott. Thank you. So that's an excellent. So if we just begin with the biblical data, and we look at the Bible itself, the text itself gives us clues as to where to look for the Exodus, and for if there's any historical Exodus at all, then the Bible gives us the clues for that. Let me just say parenthetically that when I was an undergrad student in archaeology, I went to Mississippi State University. I studied at the Cobb Institute of Archaeology. Some very prestigious professors I had, Dr. Joe Sager. Dr. Sager was a colleague of William Deaver at the University of Arizona, and also, or actually rather at Harvard University. Dr. Deaver also excavated there with at Tel Gezer with Bill Deaver. And so in my classes, I didn't get a lot of archaeological evidence for the Exodus, and as an undergraduate student, I just didn't really know where to look. And so years ago when I was a student, that kind of what led me on this quest, and to try to find evidence for the Exodus. And then I found some books by Josh McDowell, who was quoting Nelson Gluck, and then I found, and I know you know who this guy is, Dr. Edwin Yamauchi at Miami University. Read some guys like that. But it's not until recent years, and we'll talk about this, in the history of archaeology, especially among evangelicals, the evidence that's been in the ground, the pieces of the puzzle for the Exodus have really not come on the scene until the last, I would say, 20 years or so, 20, 30 years? Maybe, I don't know even, what would you say? I mean, because really the pieces are really starting to come together, are they not, Scott? Am I getting that wrong there?
Sure. No, I mean, back in the 1930s, when Garstang was excavating at Jericho, he was certainly aware of a 15th century BC date, and he was aware that he was excavating material that he thought aligned with that.
Yes.
But, I would say in the last generation, certainly 2 generations, is when all of the data has come together.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, thank you. We're going to get to that too. Thank you for reminding me of that. So what I'd like to do for the listeners is sort of we've talked about the biblical data so far, and so now I would like to sort of give a kind of a general outline of the Israelites, and they're in Egypt, and we have a friend and a mutual colleague, Dr. Doug Petrovich, and I've read some articles he's written, things like that. One of the chronologies that he gave, essentially, he believes, and I think this is generally right, and I think it's also written about by Dr. Eugene Merrill in his book, what's it called? Kingdom of Priests. That's right. Kingdom of Priests is an excellent book. And essentially what he says is that Joseph and Jacob came to Egypt in approximately 1876 BC. Is that right, Scott? A ballpark?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
So then they're there, and if they're there in 1876, and then if the Exodus occurred according to the date that we gave, or the biblical data, the 1446, that means they're there approximately 430 years or so. So just like the biblical text says, it sort of supports that. So let's now go to Egypt and sort of give a little brief outline as a springboard. Now we're going to talk about the conquest too, but I want to start in Egypt, and this is a huge subject. So Scott and I, we're going to be just kind of skimming the the top of the surface today, but there's so much more to this. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, Scott is actually I got an article coming out in a book called The 5 Views of the Exodus, and Scott is going to be giving the early date of the Exodus. It's going to be published by Zondervan, so keep an eye out for that. 5 Views of the Exodus, in which you can see the different views of that on that. So in any case, we're going to begin in Egypt. And one of the things that many people have, in fact, most people have watched the movie The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, and it's a great movie. And I got to say, my favorite Pharaoh of the Exodus is Yul Brynner, who played Ramses the Second. You kind of look like Yul Brynner, Scott. You could.
I do now, yeah.
So in any case, Ramses the Second is what most people say the Pharaoh of the Exodus was, and that was because of the mention of the store cities of Pithom and Ramses in the book of Exodus. As we kind of begin into the Exodus, we'll talk about where we think the Israelites may have been. But before we do that, from an early date standpoint, from a scholar and archaeologist who defends the early date, how do you answer the charge that, the Bible says the Israelites built the cities of the store cities of Pithom and Ramses? So how, so that's got to be where they are, right?
Well, right. Names change over time in antiquity and in modernity. For example, where I live, Houston was a century ago was Harrisburg was the name of the city.
Wow.
Now, there's only 1 out of 100,000 people in Houston today that know that they're living in Harrisburg. And so if I were addressing them, I would not say that, so-and-so passed through Harrisburg, or they would assume that I mean Pennsylvania or somewhere else.
Yes.
I would anachronistically I would say that they passed through Houston, even though Houston didn't exist 110 years ago. And so that happens very regularly in literature, and I think that's what you have in the biblical text.
Yes.
You have an updating of the text for a later reader. And so the name, of course, was not Pi-Ramesses at the time. That's then written later. And if it was, that's the end of the world, because much earlier in Genesis, you have the name Ramesses as an earlier dynastic name too.
Got it. Very good. So many people have perhaps seen the documentary Tim Mahoney, and I'm not sure. Scott, I guess you were on that. Were you on an episode of that?
Yeah. I helped edit it. I was actually with Tim in Minnesota the last week of January. Bad time to be in Minnesota,
yes.
by the way. I don't know what I was thinking of when I agreed to go there at that time. But, I was able to help with the editing of it. And I'm going to come out in parts 3 and 4 on the Exodus and Conquest, which will come out, another year or so down the road.
Fantastic. So in that, Tim interviews a lot of scholars, and one of them is David Roll, who is a British scholar, Egyptologist, who talks about trying to adjust Egyptian chronology to try to fit the Exodus. And we don't want to go in that direction, but there's been a lot of different views. But he did talk about, sort of mentioned the fact that there is an interesting site in the Nile Delta region called Avaris, if I'm saying that correctly. But it's the Arabic, is it Tel El Daba? Is that the name of the site?
That's
Scott,
correct.
could you, for the listeners, tell the listeners sort of why this particular site might be the very site that the Israelites were located, and where the Exodus happened right at that site. What are some well, first give us a little overview of that, who excavated there, why it's important, where it is geographically in Egypt, and then sort of what are some archaeological clues that we find at Avaris, at Tel El Daba, that makes us think that this is where the Israelites actually were?
So Manfred Bietak, an Austrian archaeologist, very renowned in his generation, seen by many as a dean, if you will, of his generation. Bietak spent 3 decades excavating at Tel El Daba, which was ancient Avaris, also Peru Nefer. Again, several names at different times of history. Yesterday I was in Istanbul, which used to be Constantinople, which used to be Byzantium. So again, these name changes are very, very typical. Anyway, Bietak's research, and I'm not sure what his faith commitments are, one way or the other.
Sure.
He's certainly no one's evangelical, but Bietak in his excavations revealed a Semitic population living in this Delta region, and Delta region meaning the land of Goshen. And of course, this is where the Bible places many of the events of the Exodus event. And it's important for several reasons. And there's a palatial district that was uncovered there. And everyone agrees that there was a Semitic population there. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. In his stratum 11, it's Semitic, and then you have an abandonment phase. So here we have in archaeological terms an abandonment phase following a Semitic population, and then a non-Semitic population that settles after that. Now, Tim, let's line that up with the Bible. I mean, that's what we would call a synchronism, if you will.
Yes.
And I'm really comfortable doing that. I mean, I get asked this question all the time. Are you comfortable aligning the Bible with, archaeology? I'm very comfortable.
Yes.
It doesn't bother me to take text
Not at
from
all.
Mesopotamia or text from Egypt. Why would it bother me to take the biblical text? So here we've got all these passages telling us about a 15th century pivotal event, watershed event. And now we have an archaeological site in the Delta that has a Semitic population followed by an abandonment phase.
Wow.
That's important.
Wow. So what about, that is fantastic. That's amazing evidence. And we were talking earlier about this, and there are, and you're an archaeologist, you're a field archaeologist, so it's not this is just all theory to you. You understand stratigraphy and excavation and pottery typology, ceramic typology, and how that all works. Are there any artifacts or any features at Avaris that sort of give us clues as to that either is Semitic or what may have been going on there, or what are some diagnostic perhaps artifacts that you can, that you know of?
Okay, well, the burial types,
Okay.
For one, the style of the houses, including what appears to be a four-room house.
Oh, wow.
There, and if you will, sort of a forerunner of what would become the ubiquitous Israelite four-room house.
Yes.
At least, again, BTAC's documenting these things, and he's saying, this is just what I've got. You guys can fight about the interpretation of it. Here's what it is. The pottery, of course, dates to that time. But the diet, you take the flora and the fauna, and we look at the type of food that they're consuming.
Yes.
And it's a kosher diet. And so, you start adding all those things up, and then you got, like I said, general agreement that this is a Semitic population.
Exactly. And the four-roomed house is something that we see there at Avaris, and then we also then later see it in Israel. Is that correct? In Canaan.
Right. Yeah, it becomes ubiquitous by the time you get into the Iron 2 period. You have some of it in Iron 1 also. Some have argued even in LB. We just, not to jump too far ahead, we don't see a whole lot of Israelite houses in the first couple of centuries.
Yes.
Because we've got this verse where God tells them you're going to live in houses you didn't build. So not only do they continue to be semi-nomadic, but also the Bible tells us that they weren't living in their own houses for a long time.
Exactly.
But one more piece of evidence I might mention about Avaris that the listeners might find interesting is the palatial district there.
Okay.
And this is right on a branch of the Nile. It's called the Pelusiac branch of the Nile, which is now dry. But it was right, and I was just there a couple of months ago. And
Wow.
David Roll, you mentioned, David and I co-led a tour of Egypt, which is really interesting because we were taking turns lecturing each night. So one night David would tell them, all of his spiel. The next night I would explain why that can't possibly be correct. So people are shocked to find out that we're good friends. But anyway, we were at Avaris there with the old Pelusiac branch of the Nile. The palatial district is important because in the biblical text, when Moses and Aaron are summoned by Pharaoh, it says they arrived that night.
Wow.
Well, prior to the excavation at Avaris, the only palace known of was at Memphis. And if the Israelites are in Goshen or the Delta, it's not possible to arrive in the same night in Memphis. Whereas now with this palatial district
Wow.
right there, you can just see how the text fits. What I would call verisimilitude. You read it in the text, and then you see a material culture that it's what you expect it to be.
Exactly. That is a fantastic example of, and I've taught archaeology to undergraduate students for about 13 years or so. One of the very first things that I would teach is that archaeology can function in three ways as it relates to the Bible. It can clarify the text, it can illuminate the text, and it can affirm the text. And I don't mean prove in the sense of mathematical proof, but it can provide a correlation between what we read in the text and what we actually find in the material culture, that they perfectly match. And we haven't found every single solitary thing, but for the most part, as a general overview, the text is a very reliable historical document. So now let's kind of go out and assuming now the early date of the Exodus of 1446. And I know there's some, even among evangelicals, there may have been a little bit of debate, not much, but it sort of places the Exodus sometime during the reign of either Tutmosis III or Amenhotep II. I sort of lean toward Amenhotep II because that's the 1446 date. This is the 18th dynasty of Egypt. And so assuming that, and if you have anything to add, please do, but we're going to go now, and assuming that, we go into Canaan, the Israelite, or actually we go into the wilderness for 40 years. They're there and they're wandering in the wilderness. And as they're coming out of the wilderness, Scott, give the listeners just sort of a kind of a just general timeline of the Israelites as they left Egypt. Where do they go next? And then we'll go from there.
Well, let me just add a word about Egypt before we leave there.
Sure.
When I was there recently, I was at Karnak, and you've got a 2-mile stretch connecting the temples down at Karnak, and it's lined with sphinxes, and then there's temples on either end.
Oh, it's amazing.
Well, the original temple is always the innermost. So then later builders,
yes,
later pharaohs build onto the temple. So it's getting older the further you go into the temple. Now, what's interesting is that both of those temples had sequence gaps. So you have a large area from Tutmosis III, and then there's nothing by Amenhotep II. There's nothing by Tutmosis the fourth. And then beginning with Amenhotep III, you get a rebuild that takes place. And that shows that generation gap there, very interesting, which is the very period that Egypt would have been, if you will, weakened. You actually see it in the temples.
Wow,
but,
very cool.
To move into the wilderness, of course, they're wandering in the wilderness for 39 years. They come and they camp in the plains of Moab, Joshua 2:1, Joshua 3:1, Numbers 25:1, and they go to a place called Shittim, or Abel Shittim, and that's where Moses writes the book of Deuteronomy. This is where they prepare to cross over. That is el-Hammam, by the way, and I spent 6 seasons excavating at that site. So, I looked at the conquest from both sides of the Jordan, thought about it from both sides of the Jordan, and they then, of course, crossed over at a place that now Christian pilgrims go to the baptismal site of Jesus, is the actual site where the Israelites crossed over. Remember, the gospel says that John was baptizing at Bethabara,
yes,
the house of the crossing, and
wow,
so they cross at that point, and that's, of course, what baptism represents, a new beginning.
Yes.
That's what it represented.
And the
to
continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament is just remarkable. Love it.
Yeah, and I loved what you said earlier about Yeshua and Joshua and that connection. They camp at Gilgal, or if you will, the Gilgalim, maybe some multiple campsites. Some of these footprint sites in the Jordan Valley are super interesting, and we're exploring a number of those. But then, of course, from Gilgal, they go to Jericho.
Okay, excellent. So, they start out at Jericho, and in the 1930s, and I'm here in Chicago, and in the 1930s, Jericho, Tel El Sultan, was excavated by John Garstang and a team from the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. And when Garstang excavated there, and I'm not sure, and Scott, you can tell me I don't know how many seasons he was there, but I know he was there for a couple, 2 or 3, 4, maybe longer. But at City 4, if my memory serves me correctly, City 4, the stratum at City 4, Garstang believed that he had excavated the destruction of Jericho as it was described in the Bible. In fact, he discovered a double-walled city, so it was a very heavily fortified Canaanite fortress. You had the outer wall had a revetment ramp, or had a revetment. Then there was a wall built on top of it, and then inside of it was another wall. So when the Israelites when they came to Jericho, they had this formidable fortress to really overcome. So when Garstang excavated there, he found there was a breachment in 2 sections of the walls, and literally the bricks had fallen down, forming a ramp up into the city. And he also discovered pottery that had been burned. He found seeds, if my memory is correct, that things were all burned, just as the Bible says. The Scripture tells us that God commanded the Israelites to not take anything from the city, to burn it, and to give it to God as a burnt offering, which from the Old Testament is a first fruits offering. It's a recognition that God is the one who gave the victory. So when Garstang excavated this, it was just seemed to be remarkable evidence. But then later, about 20 years or so later, a British archaeologist came along, Kathleen Kenyon, and she redates the layers that Garstang had initially said were in the late Bronze Age. And Scott, why did she do that? Why? I don't know. I know you've thought about this a lot, and you defend this, you write about this. But if people watch a documentary on the Israelites and they will talk about Jericho, they will more often than not refer to Kathleen Kenyon. But sure. Why do we as evangelicals who defend the early date, why do we believe that she was incorrect? And give us a little summary of that.
Okay, well, first of all, I admire Kenyon as an archaeologist.
Sure.
Her methodology, we call it the Kenyon-Wheeler method.
Yes.
So her methodology was excellent, and there's a lot to admire about Dame Kathleen Kenyon. Her presuppositions, however, were clear. She said she was going to Jericho with no biblical baggage. And she, jettisoned that very early on. And when she looked at, say, City 4, she saw City 4 very differently from Garstang.
Yes.
Garstang was in a more wealthy part of City 4 in the residential district, and he found quite a bit of Cypriot bichrome ware, or LB1 pottery.
Yes.
Kenyon was a really good generalist, but she didn't have an expertise in LB pottery. And in her area, it was a less wealthy area, and she didn't find much. I was in City 4 just about 5 weeks ago, something like that, with a tour group. And you're not going to believe this, but on the surface in City 4 was a piece, must have just rained or something, was a piece of Cypriot bichrome ware.
Oh, wow.
It was unbelievable. So it's still there to this very day.
That's amazing.
So the fight comes down to pottery and scarabs and seeds and walls. And, I can briefly talk about each of those if you want.
So Cypriot pottery, I've read Dr. Wood's article on this, and I know he went to University of Toronto. Dr. Bryant Wood, who is a very important figure in Associates of Biblical Research, and just a brilliant guy. But in his article, he says that basically, so there was a locally made Cypriot pottery, and then there was an imported Cypriot pottery. So which one was at Jericho? Was it the locally made Cypriot pottery? Yeah. Okay. And so when
That's
we find
right. Jericho's off the beaten path. You're nowhere near the Via Maris. You're nowhere near the King's Highway.
Got it.
This is not like at Megiddo or something. So, it's a locally made ware.
Okay. So here's where I want to get a little bit into the detail. This is something that's definitely in your wheelhouse, Scott, because I know that you deal with pottery all the time at Shiloh. And so in archaeology, and we haven't talked about this yet, but there's two different kinds of sites, maybe more, but two major type sites in Israel. There's the Tel, which is the artificial mound, the hill, and then there's the Khirbet, the ruin. But regardless of whether it's a ruin or a tell, one of the key pieces of evidence that archaeologists use is pottery. And we have these things called diagnostic pottery, which helps us to identify the different layers, which then help us to date the site. So here's the question I'll pitch to you. Whenever we find locally made Cypriot pottery, is there a general convention among archaeologists that whenever you find this pottery, we know it dates to this time period? Is there a...
Yeah.
Okay, and what is that date? Ballpark.
Yeah, so LB1, it's LB1 diagnostic.
Got it.
So that's very, very critical, and we're finding it at Shiloh also.
Awesome.
And one of the big issues has been, was Shiloh occupied when the Bible says that it was? Finkelstein's report made it seem like that there's nothing going on in LB1, but we now have clearly identifiable stratum from that area.
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you find the Cypriot pottery at Jericho in these certain areas, but yet it's redated, but yet the pottery dates it to that. So anyway, so I guess in summary, we would say that there is evidence that Garstang was correct, that Kenyon was perhaps mistaken or and a little too hasty in redating Garstang City 4.
So I'll real quickly touch on the 4 points.
Okay.
Of the walls of Jericho. She says these are MB, Middle Bronze walls, not Late Bronze Age walls. So that contradicts the biblical date, to which I would respond, I could care less when they were built. All I'm talking about is when they fell.
Exactly.
I mean, we've got walls standing for thousands of years, so that's a non sequitur. Then we have the carbonized grain, the jars that were filled to the rim. As the Bible says, this event happened right after the harvest. And the carbon-14 dates taken are very, very important. So I'll save that for the last. The scarabs. So here we have a series of 18th dynasty, a whole sequence of 18th dynasty scarabs excavated by Garstang. And, of course, Kenyon has to be able to answer that some way. So she says that these are commemorative scarabs. Their later peoples are commemorating great pharaohs. Well, the problem is that in this 18th dynasty scarab sequence, one of them is Hatshepsut. And Hatshepsut, the most hated woman in Egyptian history. I was just in Egypt, and I personally saw the monuments with her name chiseled off of the monuments of Egypt.
Wow.
So the idea that later people are venerating Hatshepsut, this is just stretches reason. Yesterday, I had a conversation with one of the top 2 scarab experts in Israel, and I won't reveal the name, but I just said, tell me about commemorative scarabs, because this makes my blood boil. When this contradicts the biblical date, then immediately they begin to say, oh, well, they must be commemorative scarabs. How could the biblical date possibly be right? And this person's response to me was essentially, you're right. That's being done, and it's being done incorrectly.
Wow. That's amazing.
So we've got, then the ceramic dates are very critical. Now, Bryant Wood, who you mentioned, went back and took a PhD with his dissertation in late Bronze Age pottery. So if anyone was qualified to go back and do a post-mortem on the Garstang and Kenyon excavations, it was Bryant Wood.
Yes.
And his conclusion was that Garstang had it right. So I'm just real quickly touching on these points.
Yes.
But finally, let me get to the carbon dating, because this is the only thing that seems to support Kenyon. And so the dating comes in around 1550 BC. And so a lot of weight is put on that. And Bruns and Vanderplik in the 90s did some additional carbon dating, and you get this 1550 date. So we have a really big issue in archaeology right now called the 1400 BC offset. And so around 1400 BC, and this goes back to Betok, by the way, at Avaris. I mean, of all the things he did at Avaris, this may be the most important. He began to scream out to the world, guys, we've got a dating problem around 1400 BC. Our carbon dates are not matching the other dating metrics.
Interesting.
So they do up to that point, and then they begin to stray by 100 to 150 years.
Wow.
Now we've got top experts in Israel who are saying the same thing. We've got, for example, stratum, I think it's 11 at Ashkelon, where we're seeing the exact same problem. So my response to Bruns and Vanderplik and Kenyon would be that, unfortunately, we have a carbon-14 dating issue, and this has nothing to do with me or with evangelicals or
exactly.
This is out there in academia.
Exactly. This is not like a bunch of Bible thumpers trying to prove the Bible per se. It's a problem for archaeologists that we're dealing with, not just there at Jericho, but also around other sites. So thank you. That is I never heard that before, and that's very good to know. So Jericho. So we got Jericho. So just so you know, folks, there is archaeological evidence for the destruction of Jericho exactly as the Bible says. You can trust your Bible that when you read in the Bible that the Israelites destroyed Jericho. It's there, and we have archaeological evidence for it. We just heard the evidence from an archaeologist, and it's all in the literature. We can give you sources if you want academic sources and articles and things like that. So let's go now to the next site. And let me say this before we get to the next site, which is I was so glad that several years ago I was able to join the ABR team as an assistant learning square supervisor with Dr. Gary Byers along the Canaanite wall at a place called Khirbet el-Maqatir. But let me just say this before we get to that, when we talk about the conquest, this came up last year when I spoke at a conference here in Illinois on the Canaanite genocide question. And so the term conquest is a little bit of a misnomer. It is true Israelites began the conquest, but it wasn't, when we think conquest, we think they just went in and just killed everybody and everything. But it necessarily wasn't the case, because when you look at the biblical record, it only states that 3 cities were definitively destroyed, and that was Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor. That doesn't mean that God didn't want them to continue to drive out the Canaanites from the land, but from the biblical record, there are only 3 the Bible states that the Israelites went in and militarily conquered. The rest of the time, they were either occupying the hill country or going in and fighting was it the Gibeonites? And so any of that to be said, so if we're looking for historical, if we're talking about historical apologetics and we want evidence for the conquest, then there are really 3 cities we need to look at. And that's Jericho, which we just looked at. And the next city, which we'll talk about now, it's the city of Ai. So a little bit of a background on Ai, and Scott, you know way more than myself about this, the history of it, but I just, from the top of my mind here, for years, it was sort of a debate among evangelical scholars, I think going all the way back to William F. Albright, as to the location of Ai. There was some debate about, well, they thought, was it here? Was it at Tel, or was it this site? And there was some confusion about exactly where it was. And so some scholars looked at one site, they excavated there for a while, no evidence came forth, they went to another site. But it wasn't until about 15, 20 years ago until we found really a positive case for a particular site being the location of Ai. Is there a way to give us just a brief overview of that?
Absolutely. A colleague of Albright's was Joseph Calloway. And Calloway taught at Southern Seminary, and he was I would say he was a good Baptist, but I'll just say he was a Baptist. Because he had a problem with the biblical date. And so he went to a site called Et Tel, which is about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. And he excavated at Tel, a very large early Bronze Age site. It was destroyed 500 years before Abraham was even there. And it probably was the Ai of Abraham's day, because Ai in Hebrew means destruction or ruin. So when Abraham pitches his tents between Bethel and Ai just probably means the huge ruined city that everybody saw there. So when Calloway excavated there, he found no occupation at the time of the conquest, 15th century, in other words. And so he then announced to the world, on the heels of this excavation, that the archaeological evidence at Ai, he called it, contradicts the Bible. Now listen, Ted, if you lose Jericho in the 50s and you lose Ai in the 60s, you've lost the conquest.
Yes.
And if you've lost the conquest, you've lost the historicity of the text. So the state couldn't be any higher.
Absolutely. That is absolutely right. And as we pointed out earlier, as Hoffmeyer stated, the Exodus and Conquest stand or fall together. So if we as Christians who believe the Bible, the biblical text, if we are going to hold to a historical Exodus and Conquest, it's not a matter of, well, just picking what you find that you like. You have to match your opinions with the data, with the archaeological data. And we know now that these other sites just really didn't come out. So it wasn't until, and we need to wrap this up. And I'm sorry, we got about maybe 5-10 minutes left, but we'll try to summarize. That's a huge subject. But so you were there, and you were the dig director at Khirbet el-Maqatir. It's in the West Bank. It's about approximately 9 miles north of Jerusalem. I was there in 2014 excavating along the Canaanite wall. There is a late Bronze Age Canaanite fortress there. And Scott, in summary, as the chief excavator there, give us some key artifacts and just an overview of why we think Khirbet el-Maqatir is the biblical site of Ai.
Okay, I'm going to give you the short version,
sure.
And folks can go to my academia.edu page and get my article, The Problem of Ai Solved After 40 Years of Excavation.
Excellent.
And then they can get more of the details. So
Perfect.
Just go to academia.edu, my page, and they can download it there. But a few of the highlights. The Bible says that the gate of Ai was on the north. It gives us a specific geographical indicator. The gate at Khirbet el-Maqatir is on the north.
Yes.
If it had been on the west, east, or the south, then it wasn't it. Because what we did at the beginning was create a criterial screen. Here's the geographical and the archaeological criteria, and let's filter this site through that. I mean, we'd excavated another site for many years and ultimately said it doesn't meet the criteria. So if we wanted to fudge the evidence, we would have done it at Khirbet before going on. So here you've got the gate on the north. You've got a militarily significant hill on the north, Jebel Abu Ammar. We have an ambush site on the west in what's called the Wadi Shaban. We have proof through pottery, through typology of occupation in the begins at MB3 and goes into LB1. We've got a destruction layer, burning in the gate, if you will. The geography fits perfectly. You know, you're between Bethel and Ai, the ancient Ai of Abraham's day. So we lined out what we feel pretty confident is the Ai of Joshua 7 and 8.
Excellent, excellent. And the site now is it's currently not being excavated, correct? It's on private land. Over.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. I visited about 6 weeks ago, and it's just being destroyed by vandalism and locals, and I almost cried when I was there.
Sad.
You know, we wanted to leave it we would have rebuilt it as an archaeological park, you know, but the vandalism was so bad, we just gave up. And I would say in 10 years, there'll be houses probably built on top of it. So thank God we were able to extract the data that we did. And now we're in the process of final publication. Volumes 1 and 2 will both come out in the next 18 months or so.
Wow. So we're about running out of time. We got maybe 5 minutes left, and I do apologize because it's so exciting because I finally get somebody that understands what I'm saying. So I talk to my friends about this, and they're like, I don't know what you're saying. So, from Ai they go to Mount Ebal. Is that correct? And
yes.
We know geographically where this is. Do you want to just briefly state why Ebal is important in the biblical record?
They actually go and they renew covenant with Yahweh between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, right? And
yes.
So the Bible says that Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal. Adam Zertal, around 1980, in his survey of Manasseh, found this altar structure. Later, he was able to excavate it. There's a rectangular altar that dates to the 13th century BC.
Amazing.
But underneath that rectangular altar, at the perfect geometric center, is an earlier round altar.
Awesome. Wow.
That I believe dates to the 15th century. And I don't have time to get into all the reasons. But again, see my book next year, the chapter in 5 Views of the Exodus. I'll give all the data in there. But I will mention something very interesting. The Scarabs dealing with this. One dates to Thutmose III, which we would go, yes, that's mid-15th century, probably the Pharaoh of the oppression, and then the other is Ramesses II. And so I would assign that to the earlier stratum, if you will, although it was transitional. Well, again, I talked with a top Scarab expert recently who does not agree with that dating that was given to that Ramesses Scarab. This person says that they're both Thutmose III.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of stuff going on regarding Mount Ebal, new research and writing that we're doing, and the revolutionary wet sifting that we're doing. I would love to be able to get a hold of those dump piles from Mount Ebal when they were not even dry sifting the first season.
Wow.
There's no telling what's in those things.
That's amazing.
Let's just suffice it to say the Bible says there was an altar on Ebal, and we have a 15th century round altar there underneath this rectangular altar that matches the biblical chronology and geography.
Perfect. And summarize, I'm going to sort of kind of wrap us up here. I'll let you wrap up, but we're going to kind of fly over quickly Hatzor. We don't have time to get into the details, but just suffice it to say there are some good articles. I think on Associates for Biblical Research, you guys have been doing some videos. So if people go to, is it BibleArchaeology.org?
Yeah.
And click on that. There are some good resources on the archaeological evidence for the destruction of Hatzor. So check that out. But I wanted to have time just to as we wrap this up, Scott, to talk about where you are currently excavating in Israel, and you're there in Jerusalem now. So we're glad to be talking to you from Israel itself. But you're going to be excavating, and you're about to give a paper. I don't know if you have already. If this is out, maybe you can talk about this. But so the Israelites go to Shiloh, and you guys are excavating there now. So give us the broad overview of that.
Okay, so I'll give you the real short version, then you'll have to have me on another time, and we'll spend the whole time talking about Shiloh.
Perfect.
My favorite topic. So at Shiloh is another one of those conquest sites. It's mentioned Joshua and the Israelites arrived there around, say, 1399, beginning of the 14th century. Do we have evidence there? And is there then evidence of a cultic system that operated there and during the time of Joshua? So these are the big questions. There was a Canaanite city-state system that existed. You had the Hatzor city-state, Jerusalem city-state, Megiddo city-state, and the Shechem city-state. All of them fought the Israelites or resisted the Israelites except the Shechem city-state. And the people at Shechem allied themselves with the Israelites, okay? When they went to renew covenant at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, there was no battle. They joined in with them, the text says.
That's right, yes.
All Israel together, alien and citizen alike, joined in. Now, I believe that Shiloh was part of the Shechem city-state, and the Bible records no conflict, even though we know there were people there. And so I think they also embraced Yahwehism, and this is why Joshua establishes the tabernacle there. We are now excavating evidence of a destruction level that probably pertains to the Philistine destruction. I just published an article on a ceramic pomegranate from Shiloh, which is a motif of the tabernacle. We have storage rooms that encircle the site. No other site in Israel has that because they'll pay their tithe. Of course, they're bringing commodity. So this is the type of thing that we're pulling together after 3 seasons that is beginning to paint a material culture that matches the biblical text.
It's got it also, as we kind of finish up here, is there also are there animal bones? We found sacrificial type of animal bones as well.
Yeah, Ted, and let me tell you this, there's a lot of animal bone.
Wow.
Much more than other sites that I've excavated, and it's only bones from the biblical sacrificial system.
Wow.
And guess what? 60% of these bones are from the right side of the animal.
Wow.
Now, give me an explanation for that outside of the biblical text. Leviticus 7 is very clear. The right side is the priest's portion. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of animal bones.
Wow.
So this is not an anomaly that I'm talking about. Finkelstein noted it in his publications that there was a disproportionate number of right to left, but he had no explanation.
So exciting.
I do. I do. So,
just read the Bible.
Yeah, in the conference that I'm speaking at Thursday, I'm going to be talking about our bone evidence. It's pretty exciting.
Fantastic. Well, Scott, the hour has flown by, and we could talk for hours on this. And we will, if you are agreeable to it, we'd like to have you back on and talk about Shiloh. And we'll just dedicate the whole episode to Tel Shiloh and what's going on there. And thank you again. It's a great honor to have you on our inaugural podcast for Monocle Spade. Thank you for being on.
Thanks, Ted. And I'll just encourage your listeners to go to digshiloh.org, our dig website, to learn more, or to my personal website, scottstripling.net. And I'm looking forward to having you and your friends join us at Shiloh.
Absolutely. And Scott just mentioned it, so you know, as listeners and watchers of Monocle Spade and also for Epic Archaeology, we are planning on, Lord willing, joining the excavation at Shiloh next year. If you want to go, send me an email. Let me know of your interest at ted@epicarchaeology.org, and I will get you information on how to be a part of that. But it's an exciting time to be alive as a Christian, to see these evidences of the Bible really come to light. It's just absolutely encouraging to our faith. So thank you again for watching. This is a listener-supported ministry. So we thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your support. If you would like to support and become a monthly donor of Epic Archaeology, you can go to epicarchaeology.org and click on support. And we would love to have you as a monthly supporter or a one-time gift. All of your donations are tax deductible. We're part of the Defenders Media Alliance, and so we are so grateful to be in partnership with them. Defenders Media is a great organization, so check out their website and all the ministries that they support. Again, thank you again for watching. This is Ted Wright with Epic Archaeology and our inaugural podcast of Monocle Spade. Thank you for watching. God bless you.
This program is listener supported and it is produced by Defenders Media. Thank you so much for listening to Monocle Spade.